Welcome, everyone. We at Silver Spring Progressive Action and NOPE are thrilled to welcome you all here for this very special evening with author and historian Heather Cox Richardson. And from the size of the crowd, I think we have around 1,500 people, 1,600 people on right now. I'm sure that you're excited to be here as well. I'm Dory Cantor-Pastor. I'm from Silver Spring Progressive Action, and soon I'll be introducing Deborah Fried-Levin from NOPE. It's been a tough time to be a Dem recently. It's easy to get tossed and turned by the latest headlines and lose sight of what we must do to make sure that Trump is resoundingly defeated in November, and also to make sure that the president has majorities in both houses of Congress so that we can address real issues and become a more just, equitable, and compassionate country. I want to start, though, by thanking our co-sponsoring groups. There are many, as you can see on the screen. We're more effective working together. In the chat now and at the end of the meeting, you'll be able to hook up with these groups because we are sending information about SSPA, NOPE, and each of the co-sponsoring groups in that material. And I hope everyone here finds ways repeatedly to contribute to a November victory. I strongly suspect that everyone here recognizes what's at stake. The word existential may be being used so frequently that it's using some of its punch and even its meaning, but we are fighting for the fundamental nature of this country, whether we remain a democracy that at least gives lip service to freedom and equality or not. We're fighting for the personal safety of our friends, relatives, neighbors, and even of ourselves who might be people of color or LGBTQ or born in a different country or just don't have much money. And maybe I shouldn't have phrased that in the way that I just did, because it doesn't matter if they're our friends, neighbors, relatives, or not, because these core values don't depend on who they are. They should reflect who we are, and we need to make sure it stays that way. In the Senate this year, the best we can hope for in November is a tie. That means that if we lose the presidency, which will not happen, but if it does, we also lose the tie-breaking vote in the Senate, and the Senate confirms Supreme Court justices. That means the House of Representatives may be our one backstop against disaster, and that's not an overstatement. And that's why it's so important and why we're focusing on it tonight. And we're also focusing on state legislatures because, among other things, that's where voting laws get made, and they affect all of this. So let's get to it. SSPA, NOPE, and all of the co-sponsoring groups have many opportunities to get involved, writing letters, making phone calls, giving money, or knocking doors to talk with voters who are more like you than you imagine. In the chat now and throughout the meeting, we'll list ways to get involved, including ways to help the specific candidates we're highlighting tonight, all of whom are in very tight but winnable races. And please stick around after our special guest leaves, because we'll have even more about how you can volunteer for a Blue November. A joy for me in planning the event is to do it with my friend Deborah Fried-Levin, the visionary leader of NOPE, an inspiration to SSPA, and longtime leader in raising funds for issues we care about. Deborah, take it away.
Thank you, Dory, and welcome all. Another big shout out to our co-sponsors who are leading the charge to win this election. Dory and I agree, we need to double down and do whatever it takes to win in November, both with our time and our money. For us, winning means winning up and down the ballot. Tonight, we all will share giving and volunteer opportunities. We hope you'll join us to canvass, write letters, make calls in the coming days. And there's no need to wait. You can act tonight by donating. We must flip the House to advance a Democratic agenda, especially if the unthinkable happens. Tonight, you can donate to these 6 candidates. They are challengers running against incumbent Republicans or for open seats. We have targeted candidates who are running in very close, winnable races and who will benefit most from your money. Your donation will go directly to these candidates right now, via the Act Blue link you see in the chat. It will be divided equally among them unless you choose to use the customize amount option. The link will be posted regularly in the chat. Our goal is to raise $50,000 for this slate of House candidates. Watch the chat for our progress. And there's more. State legislatures are more important than ever in protecting democracy. State legislators are on the front lines, fighting for abortion access, gun safety, voting rights, fair election maps, and so much more. Electing state legislative candidates is critical to advancing a Democratic agenda and slowing GOP insanity. Again, these candidates are all in battleground states, are running in very close, winnable races. Our donation will make a significant difference to their campaigns. State candidates turn out voters and have up-ballot impact. The ActBlue link to donate to these candidates will also be in the chat. Again, our goal is to raise $50,000 for this slate of candidates. Tonight's the night to double down. $50,000 to flip the House and $50,000 to our state candidates for a total of $100,000. Sounds like a lot, but in fact, probably not that hard. There are, I don't even know what the number is right now. Last I checked, there are 2,000 people on this Zoom. We can so do this if we all dig in, do our part. With our help, we can do this. We are asking you to support 12 candidates, 6 on each slate. So donate $120 or $1,200 to each slate, or however much feels right for you. But do it now. Do it tonight. The ActBlue link for both slates is in the chat and will be there throughout the program. Heather will not mind if you take a moment to give to these candidates. The question for all of us is, what is democracy worth to you? That's what we're all about tonight, and that's why we are all so committed to winning in November. We need to dig deep and do whatever it takes to win. Thank you in advance for giving generously tonight, and look for a follow-up email from us tomorrow. Now it's my honor to introduce Heather Cox Richardson. So many of us start our day reading her blog, Letters from an American. She is our modern-day I.F. Stone, highlighting what is in plain sight, but which the press ignores. She's a historian, blogger, podcaster, and author, most recently of the acclaimed book, America Awakening, Notes on the State of America. As a historian, she's interested in the contrast between image and reality in American politics and firmly believes in American democracy, despite its many failures. Heather informs us, inspires us, and tonight will give us a historical context for the urgency of the work that we all must do now if we are to save our democracy. She will speak for 15 minutes and then take questions for 30 minutes. If you have a question, use the chat button on your screen. Use the Q&A button on your screen, not the chat button. Remember to keep your eye on the chat for useful links and updates. Now I'll turn it over to you, Heather. Again, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Well, and thank everybody who's here for joining this tonight. I'm really pleased to be here, and I know it's not always easy to turn out on a Wednesday night at this hour just to hear a Zoom. But I'm here, obviously, to talk about grassroots organizing, and it's a really special election considering all the pieces that are moving and what the grassroots mean here. So one of the things that I think we've really recognized in the last couple of years, at least, is that there has been this focus in American democracy now for a while, or in American politics for a while, on having, somebody save us, somebody come in, some great leader, and we fight over who our leaders are. But, the truth is American democracy has always been about us. And in this particular election, it is overwhelmingly about us, because while there are a number of people who are jockeying to become the people who will control all of America, the recent tapping of J.D. Vance for the vice presidency is no small thing, right? But what we're really talking about is who owns this country. And I don't mean financially. I mean, what does democracy mean? And the thing about this moment that we're in is that what I see as I travel around the country is people are organizing all over this country to demonstrate what democracy means to us. And those things are that we have a right to be treated equally before the law, which is a big deal when you consider the fact that this radical Supreme Court has just said that there is one person in this country who is not bound by the law, that we have a right to be bound by the law, and we have a right to have a say in our government. Around those principles, people are organizing all around the country. Now, that doesn't mean we're always going to agree. We're going to disagree about a lot of stuff, but that's good. That's actually how democracy works. What we're trying to do is to protect the guardrails of the system under which we have lived for 248 years, almost 250 years. And in order to do that, it means coming together and vocalizing those things and working together to protect that democracy. And people always ask me, why do I have faith that we can do this? And the answer, first of all, is because of people like you who are turning up on a Wednesday night to hear about democracy. And because of all the people that I meet and who write to me and who really I channel when I write the nightly letters. So in the modern moment, the reason I have faith is because of everybody who's here. But we have done this before in the American past. So when you think of our history, this is not the first time that a small group of elites have tried to destroy democracy and put themselves in charge. You think about the 1850s, for example, and if you had lived in America in 1853 or 1854, you would have thought that essentially you had lost American democracy and a small group of elite enslavers had taken over our system. They had managed to get the White House, control the Supreme Court, and control the Senate. And in 1854, they also managed to force through the House of Representatives a bill that said that human enslavement could move into the new Western territories, where there would then be new Western states, and those Western slave states would work with the Southern slave states to take over America entirely and turn the United States into a slave-owning nation. And the people who wanted to do that were very articulate about it. They said, this is the wave of the future, and we are the ones who are going to be the most powerful people in the United States, and we are going to be the most powerful people in the world. And our system of human enslavement is the perfect God-given system for a society to operate most efficiently. And people thought that they were really going to win, that those elite enslavers were really going to win. But what happened after the passage of that law that enabled that to happen, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, is people in the North started looking at each other and saying, we don't agree about immigration, and we don't agree about finances, and we don't agree about internal improvements, but we can agree that we need to preserve the guardrails of American democracy so that we can, in fact, work out our differences within this system that protects people's rights. Now, again, that was a fairly exclusive version of those rights, but we've expanded it since then. And recognizing that they had to work together, they started to come together first in what were called anti-Nebraska meetings that only said, we stand against that. We stand against the idea of elite enslavers taking over our society. But by the elections of 1854, those people actually managed to sweep the House of Representatives. And as the elite enslavers recognized that they were increasingly up against the ropes, they tried harder and harder to force their version of the United States onto the majority in the North. They did things like controlling the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court handed down the Dred Scott decision in 1857, which said that, of course, that Black Americans had no rights that a white man was bound to respect. That's that famous passage from that. But also, it said that Congress had no right to legislate in the territories, so it could not keep enslavement out of that American West, where those new slave states would be able to work with the Southern slave states and take over the country. Increasingly, as the elite enslavers tried to force onto the majority their version of society, and they made up less than 1% of the population, Americans in the North pushed back and said, no, that's not what we want. And by 1858, the rise of Abraham Lincoln mainstreamed the idea that standing for equality really meant standing for America, that was, as he said, a conservative position because it preserved the Declaration of Independence. The idea of human rights preserved the idea of the Declaration of Independence. By 1859, Abraham Lincoln has articulated a new kind of government that says the government shouldn't just work for the very wealthy, the elite enslavers. It should try and make opportunity, including education and equality before the law, available to all men. Now, again, men at that point, that's going to have to be expanded later on. And he articulates this idea that the government should work for ordinary people, not for these elite enslavers. By 1860, again, white men had put Abraham Lincoln into the White House, or elect him to the White House. He is inaugurated in 1861. By 1863, he has put in place this government that does work for the people, and he has signed the Emancipation Proclamation, ending the system of human enslavement across the United States as part of the system of American democracy. And by November of 1863, he has given the Gettysburg Address, which calls for a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and which calls for a new birth of freedom in the United States. It completely reshapes the United States to create the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, which are still the ones on which our civil rights stand. The 14th Amendment is still the centerpiece of our civil rights. So in the 1850s, Americans looked like they had a much worse opportunity then than we do now, but they managed to gather together as a grassroots organization and to take back American democracy. The same thing happened in the 1880s when it looked like industrialists had taken over everything. They had the Senate, they had the White House, they even had the House of Representatives, but and the Supreme Court. But ordinary Americans joined together and said, hey, wait a minute, this isn't what we thought we were getting when we fought in the Civil War and when we backed the Declaration of Independence. That happened again, and they managed to put in place the progressive era of the early 20th century that gave us many of the reforms that led to where we got in the 20th century. And the same thing happened again in the 1830s, where ordinary Americans said, you know what? We don't want a government that works for a very small number of people. We want a government that works for all of us. And from that, we got first the New Deal under the Democrats and then the liberal consensus under both Democrats and Republicans after World War II that called for a government that regulated business, provided a basic social safety net, promoted infrastructure, and protected civil rights. We are now fighting for that yet again in the 21st century because a very small group of elite wealthy people is working to destroy American democracy and put in place the Christian nationalism that their base calls for. Now, one of the things that is really interesting to me about this moment is that our coalition that is fighting back against that is really different than the ones that took the reins in the 1850s and the 1880s and the 1930s. Because what we have in the United States in this moment is a new demographic that we have never had to grapple with before. And that is that for the first time in our history, because of the 1960s, both in terms of who was included in American society and in terms of the medical care that we've had, we have a number of people, a new group of people who have between 20 and 30 years after their children have left the home and after they have gotten to where they wanted to be in their careers, in which people have connections and they have educations and they have skills, often they have money, and they are looking in those 20 to 30 years at what to do with their lives. And what we are seeing is extraordinary numbers of older Americans turning out and saying, hey, we're going to put our muscle into preserving democracy so that our grandchildren and our children have the same kind of opportunities that we had, and that we don't take what we inherited and tear it up and throw it away. And that's what I'm seeing everywhere is people who previously weren't involved in politics, maybe didn't think it mattered that much, who are now turning out and saying, yeah, I'm in this. And I'm in this with the skills that I have developed. The fact that as a woman, for example, I was able to get a world-class education, or because of the Voting Rights Act, I was able to start voting in a way that I had not been able to do before. And in this moment, I look around me and people say, how can you have faith? And I'm looking at the 1850s when only white men, primarily propertied white men, could vote. I'm looking at the 1880s and the 1890s when that was true even to a greater extent. That is, the laws had been changed in a number of states to cut out immigrant voting as well in the North, as well as, of course, Black voting in the South and brown voting in the West. And I'm looking at the 1930s where women could vote, but where in fact people of color really couldn't vote. And in all of those instances, grassroots organizations were able to turn out enough people to turn the ship of state, because they recognized that central principle that Abraham Lincoln talked about, that if you start saying that some people are not equal, if you start to divide up our population and to say, well, maybe women shouldn't vote, or maybe indigenous people shouldn't vote, or maybe immigrants shouldn't vote, all people who have been excluded from the vote in the past. If you start to say that some people really are better than others, in all the periods I just talked about, even white men and white men of property recognized that when you started slicing and dicing the electorate that way, as Lincoln said, it was only a question of time until you were one of those people who was on the outs. And so in all those periods, men came around to the idea that they had to protect the principles in the Declaration of Independence. But in our era, we actually have added to that voting base women, Black Americans, and people of color. And we are adding our voices to that long-standing tradition of pushing back against a small group of a minority in America who is trying to impose its will on the rest of us. So in this moment, as it is becoming clearer that the old Republican Party, and I assume that some of the people here, at least at one point in their lives, had ours by their name, that party's gone. It would be interesting to have a discussion about where the ideology of that old Republican Party might go in the future. But in this moment, it's gone. And what we have instead are the MAGA Republicans, the Trump Republicans, who are centering themselves around what is explicitly a rejection of American democracy, because they have explicitly said that the idea of democracy, that people must be treated equally before the law, weakens a nation. They don't believe that's a good thing because it requires that the government's laws treat women, LGBTQ plus Americans, and immigrants and racial minorities as equal to white men. And they believe that, first of all, that breaks down the patriarchy in society that mirrors a religious vision that they have that I'll explain in a minute. They also believe that immigrants will, as they say, poison the blood of a nation by letting immigrants in, which in America, I just can't even go there, right? Because we are a nation of immigrants. And they also believe that LGBTQ plus people are weaken society by, again, flying in the face of their religion. So in place of democracy, they have offered the idea of elevating a single strong man, and this you can see in Project 2025, a single strong man, and bringing all the powers of the government, the previously democratic government, into the control of that one person. And once that one person has that power, what he will do is create a strong government, not a weak government, but a strong government that imposes their version of Christian nationalism, which outlaws abortion for any reason. It limits what people can read because they don't want people to have access to what they consider irreligious books that talk about LGBTQ plus relationships, for example. And that impose the sort of patriarchy, women back in the home, and so on, that they believe goes back to a more virtuous society in the American past. Now, crucially, they are patterning their system on Viktor Orban's Hungary. And he is the prime minister of Hungary and took a democracy and has turned it into a place where people still vote. But because he has taken control of all these aspects of society, really, he just runs everything. And if you look at people like J.D. Vance, he has spoken very highly of Viktor Orban. He has praised Project 2025. He has called for the sorts of programs that have gone into place in Hungary. And so we see in front of us not some vague, I just don't like that other party kind of thing, or even a focus on a single law or two. We literally are facing the attempt of an American major political party to overturn American democracy and replace it with a Christian dictatorship. And again, they have said this. This is not some fantasy. This is literally the plan. And so in terms of being the grassroots movement that stands up against that, we are embracing American democracy and saying, listen, we may not agree on a lot of stuff, but we can agree that we must preserve our democracy and the guardrails of our democracy, or we know that we will lose it to this kind of dictatorship. And when I say grassroots organizing, obviously, we're all giving whatever we can. And in terms of the the races that we're looking at tonight, you know, money is so important right now, because we're weirdly, we're not that far into the cycle. Like, it's much better to give money now than it is to give it on November 1st, because it can really be used to multiply people's reach. But not just money. Money is important. Obviously, voting is important. Making sure everybody's registered is important. But one of the things about protecting democracy today is that this is a moment for all Americans who care about democracy to talk about it and to bring their A game, not only to defend democracy in terms of itself, but to say, hey, I'm proud to be in this country, and I'm really good at whatever your skill is. And I'm going to bring that to my community. I'm going to bring my, my support for my local YMCA or whatever to the table in the next several months to demonstrate that we're a community, and that we're a good community, we're a decent community, we're an inclusive community, and we represent American democracy. Because what we're up against is the Republicans like Trump and Vance pushing fear, pushing anger, making people afraid. And to the degree that we can counter that with our behavior, with our reinforcement of the joy of democracy and the creativity of democracy, as well as the hard work of democracy, we are demonstrating that what we do as this country works. And that really flies in the face of the sorts of fear mongering that we're seeing on the Republican side this year. So thank you for being here. Thank you for all you do. But man, take it out there and demonstrate that we're strong, and we're proud, and we're decent, and we're joyful, because that's really what turned people out in the 1850s and the 1880s and 90s and the 1930s. Partly the fear, but partly, hey, I got your back, and this is what I do really well, and I'm going to bring it to the table. So thank you for being here. And with that, I will open it up to whatever you want to ask me.
So I'm going to help us transition to the questions. Thank you, Heather, again, as always, for inspiring us. We can speak about heart and soul, but then, in this interesting moment, we can measure it. I mean, the amount of money that we've raised to this point, I think I'm getting my math right. We're about $90,000. I think I set offered a goal at the beginning. We're going to raise $100,000, and we just never know. We really, really never know. But with 2,400 people on this Zoom, you all are showing up. I mean, as Heather said, you're showing up now, and I know you're going to continue to show up. We are shy. I mean, we have crashed past our house goal. We will crash past our 100,000 goal, and we are resetting now. But we really, really, really need you to dig in for the state legislators. I mean, that really is where the action is happening. We've seen it on abortion access. We've seen it on guns. Fair maps. Help us all for fair maps. So if you've already given for the flip the House, now put a little into the state legislature. I'm sure Heather can tell us more about. That really is the front line for so many. And we will continue to give the opportunity to give on the other slates. And keep at it. You keep following the chat. You guys are amazing. I am going to turn it over to Dory to introduce the question part.
And I am not going to take any time at all, because I want to get right back to Heather speaking, but I will bring on the people who are raising the questions to her. I know people have put questions in the chat. We're going to get to as many of them as we can. And if you have other questions, again, put them in Q&A, not in the chat. So now I just want to bring Ori Hall from NOPE and Betsy Devlin Fultz from SSPA on screen. I'm going to go off screen and go to it.
Can I just say one thing about the state legislators? So, as you know, I've been traveling all around the country for months now, and I've gotten to talk to a lot of the state legislators, especially the ones that are really overwhelmed in certain states. North Carolina springs to mind, Tennessee as well. And one of the things that is really cool is, because they're fighting such a hard battle, because they're in states where they've been gerrymandered within an inch of their lives and so on, they're really good. They are really, really good. And when you think about, looking forward, the developing bench on the Democratic side is, and, I deal with a lot of politicians, and, most of them are good. some are great. These people are fabulous. But the trick is, in order to make that bench matter in 2026 and 2028, we have to win in 2024, because this is the election that says there will be an election in 2026 and 2028. So especially if you are in those states or care about the state, North Carolina, Tennessee, the other states that are down ballot races where they're so important, really back these people because they're fabulous.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Heather. And it's really an honor to have you with us. You're wonderfully inspiring. And we have a question about the debate last month. After the debate, you reminded readers to take the longer view and not compare the debate performances with the ability to govern successfully. But Democrats don't look credible telling voters not to believe what they saw, and persuasion is also a part of being an effective president. So how can we convince voters when we're out there knocking on the doors or on the phones that the Democratic choice is the best one for the country?
Well, I guess that's a great question. But the thing that kind of surprises me, two things surprise me. One is that the media has just had a feeding frenzy on Joe Biden. And to the point that a lot of us are kind of scratching our heads and thinking, what's going on here? Because, I'm not a media basher. It's hard to be a journalist. And yet, the questions that are being asked of Joe Biden and not of Donald Trump are pretty glaring. So I think it's absolutely fine to go after Biden, but nobody goes after Trump about anything. The man can't say a sentence, basically. He keeps falling asleep. I mean, we got all this stuff going on, and we're not getting that coverage in the media. So partly people are reacting to what's going on with the media. And that's where, again, people like me, but everybody comes in to say, hey, wait a minute here, let's hold everybody to the same standard, first of all. And the other thing that I would say about where we are is, I've worked with Biden, in passing now several times. He's fine. I mean, you can take that from me.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, hang on, I just unplug my laptop and it'll go blank. Hang on. Okay. That being said, here's what I don't get. Biden did not look good in that debate. I actually don't see very well, so I didn't see how he looked, which is apparently what people are reacting to. His answers were fine. And if you read this transcript, his answers were fine. But the thing that I would say that I find baffling is that this has been the most successful presidency since at least LBJ and possibly FDR. And I don't care what the man looks like. I don't care if he can't stand up. If he can keep getting stuff through Congress and keep pulling together things like NATO and so on, I couldn't care less. So, I don't know if I certainly wouldn't argue with people if they say, oh, he's an old man and he looks terrible. But it's just, I feel really funny about it because Trump can't answer a question and nobody's asking him to. And then you have this guy who's gotten through these groundbreaking laws and has put together new military coalitions. He got the Republic of Korea and Japan to sit down together and start to work together. He got the Arab countries to back Israel when Iran attacked it. And I just don't even know what you do with somebody saying, yeah, but he doesn't look good to me. Best I can do on that one.
Thank you.
America was founded on the shared values of the Enlightenment, including individual rights and religious freedom, the rule of law. But some have argued that we are now in a post-Enlightenment era and no longer collectively share these underlying values that help to bind our pluralistic society together. Do you see a shift in the collective values that we share? And if so, how do you think this is impacting our democracy?
Oh, that's like one of my sweet spot questions. So I think what you're referring to is the fact that you're absolutely correct. We were founded on these Enlightenment values. And mind you, I celebrate those Enlightenment values because they also say that we should have fact-based argument and we should choose among the best argument. That's never to say, by the way, that those values were not themselves inherently problematic in other ways. Just say that there. Because lots of people are like, wait a minute, that's not really what Enlightenment values did in certain Western countries. But in the United States, those values have been very important. And the trick is, I think we took them for granted, especially after World War II. We stopped defending them because we thought everybody agreed with them. And quite literally in 1960, there's a very famous art among political scientists, so maybe it's not on your bedside table, but it's an article by a guy named Phil Converse who talks about the American voter. And he says to people who are running for office, stop talking about principles. We all agree. We're all on the same page. So instead of actually trying to say we all have to protect democracy, which of course people were doing after World War II, especially with the rise of communism and the adherence of fascism in certain other places, that we should instead just slice and dice our constituencies and stop bothering to talk about principles. And that really went into both of the major parties, both the Republicans and the Democrats started to just nail together coalitions. And what that did is it allowed this very small faction of people who called themselves conservatives, although they were right-wing reactionaries, to start to tell their own version of what the United States should look like. And they became known as movement conservatives. And what they said is this shared set of values that Americans are operating under that gave us the liberal consensus government of the post-war years, the one that regulated business and protected us, a social safety net and promoted infrastructure and protected civil rights. That was, in fact, a form of communism. And they kept saying that they were going to protect the individual against this empire. And that's the theme that started to flow through the movement conservatives and gradually into the Republican Party and gets embraced by Ronald Reagan. And if you think about that vision of the individual being protected from the empire, that's really Star Wars. Right? That's a mythic image of what humanity is about. And that was the most popular movie in 1977, and Reagan gets elected in 1980. That gets absorbed into the Republican Party, that idea that really this government that protects the sorts of things you're talking about is not actually good for America, and that's not actually protecting society. But the trick is that Americans like that liberal consensus. They've always liked it. They still like that liberal consensus. So increasingly, those people who now have taken over the Republican Party became a smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller minority. So they had to do things like suppress the vote and gerrymander and get favorable decisions from the Supreme Court to do things like enable them to flood elections with money. And then they got, Shelby v. Holder in 2013 that cuts back on the Voting Rights Act and became, again, a smaller and smaller minority until finally they had to come up with a way to say we shouldn't protect those values. We shouldn't protect democratic values and the idea of a majority voting for stuff because the majority keeps voting for the wrong stuff. So instead, we're going to argue that we are beyond that was its own moment. And this is where this changing ideology in the United States dovetails with that of somebody like Viktor Orban, who has said democracy is over. They have said Enlightenment values are over because what they have argued, and I'm pointing to people like William Barr, who was the Attorney General under Trump and previously under one of the Bushes, but W. Bush, that these Enlightenment values have destroyed American virtue. And they're trying to focus on American virtue. And what they are saying and what they have said ideologically is that Americans are no longer virtuous. Because you have LGBTQ plus people and because people get divorced and because people are willing to have abortions, they have a very fancy idea and a very sanitized idea of what the past used to look like, let me tell you, which would be an interesting conversation, by the way. But because Americans have abandoned virtue, they say, they need to get back to the virtues of the early years in the United States, because the founders talk about virtue, right? Although they mean something different about it than those people do today. And in order to get to virtue, what they mean, or what the framers meant when they said self-government, was not the way we have interpreted it ever since. And in fact, as the founders actually really did interpret it, the idea that you should be able to have a say in your government, they say that this means you should be able to govern yourself. Self-government just says, I'm going to behave well. But because humans are inherently sinful by this argument, they need to have religion imposed on them. So through this kind of pretzel logic, you get the idea that we don't need those Enlightenment values. Instead, we need to impose religion on Americans in order to fulfill our destiny. I find it terrifying. I find that terrifying because it is a complete rejection of the arguments of the founders who wrote the Declaration of Independence, of the framers who wrote the Constitution, and of the Enlightenment. And if you think about the sorts of things that Steve Bannon talks about, Trump's media whisperer there, or that so many of the people embracing Project 2025 have talked about, they are basically saying, let's ditch the Enlightenment and go instead to this idea of religion and sort of a fantasy past and impose it on the United States in the 21st century. Okay, now everybody has fallen asleep.
No,
No, absolutely not. So our next question has to do with the Supreme Court. President Biden appears ready to follow in the footsteps of past presidents like Lincoln and FDR with a series of important Supreme Court reforms aimed at moderating the Supreme Court. How do Biden's efforts compare with Lincoln's and FDR's, and would term limits increase respect for the court or undermine the rule of law?
So listen, we got a real problem with the Supreme Court. And I mean that not only in that they are a group of radicals who are trying to overthrow democracy, but because our system doesn't work if people don't have faith in the Supreme Court. And that is rock bottom. So in addition to the particular problem of this Supreme Court, we have a democratic problem with the Supreme Court. And remember, the Constitution does not outline the size of the Supreme Court or what it's supposed to do. It tells it a few things it's supposed to do, but I always joke with my students that the framers spent a really long time on Congress because that was supposed to be first among equals, right? They got the whole first section is on Congress and it's very detailed and everything Congress is supposed to do. And then they go to the second section, which is on the executive, and that's a little less detailed, but there's still a lot in there about the executive. And I always joke with my students that by the time they got to the judiciary, they were all tired and hot and they said, oh, let's just have a judiciary. Let's go out and have a beer. So a lot of the rules around our judiciary are really established by Congress in the Judiciary Act of 1798, and those are imposed, first of all, by Congress, and then we get the right of judicial review in 1803 with Marbury v. Madison. That's taken on by the court. It's not given to it by the Constitution. So the size of the Supreme Court has always been changeable, and the current size of the Supreme Court was established in 1869 by U.S. Grant. The country's grown a little bit since 1869. So I'm somebody who believes that we need to expand the court, but you need to expand the court in a way that increases faith in the court, not decreases it. And one of the things that happened with, when Lincoln is dealing with the Supreme Court, that's the Taney Court that handed down the Dred Scott decision. And its reputation was literally so bad that one newspaper editor said that the opinion of 10 men in a bar room, in a Washington bar room, it would be more valuable than that of the Supreme Court. So one of the things that Lincoln was trying to do was to find a way to make it look more respectable. So that's one of the things that he's trying to do. And he brings on people who from the West, for example, he brings on a Democrat from the West to try and make it look like he's not packing the court. FDR pretty clearly was trying to make sure that the court would stop overturning the New Deal regulations. And that backfired on him because people were like, no, we need an independent Supreme Court. So the other problem that we have with the modern day Supreme Court is what I just identified with the fact that we are now this grassroots that is trying to take back our democracy, is that until very recently, the Supreme Court appointment was not one that you kept until you turned toes up. People left because they got old, because they didn't want to, literally in the early days, ride a horse around the circuit. You know, once you got modern transportation and modern medicine, it was much easier for people to stay on the court forever. So I do like this idea of having an 18-year term limit, because I don't like the idea of saying we're going to have an age limit on things, because I know people who are 61, which is what I am, who you maybe wouldn't want to have make you a peanut butter sandwich. And I know people who are 92 who are sharp as tacks. So I think that's really not a great idea to do that, to say you should have age limits the way people talk about. I do think that saying you get an 18 years and it's going to turn over is one really important way to deal with the problem of age that I just, or the problem of longevity that I just identified, because, you know, the whole idea of Trump being, you know, being reelected, if he gets reelected, he will almost certainly get at least 2 Supreme Court appointments. And they're going to be at least as extreme as the people we've got there now. And what does that look like? I mean, I am beyond the point where I am willing to say, yeah, I'm going to let 6 unelected people determine how 332 million of us are going to live. That's bonkers. And so how does that play out? You know, what do we do? And I am really interested in protecting the guardrails of democracy and saying, yeah, the Supreme Court should have a major say in what we do. But our Supreme Court just destroyed the fundamental principle under which America was created, that no one is above the law. And they said, oh yeah, excuse me, except the president, who is the most powerful person in the world. I'm not there with that. So I'm glad Biden is addressing that more fully than he has been. I think that he may have made the mistake of thinking, as many people did, that the way you destroyed a reactionary movement is the same way that West Germany destroyed Nazism after World War II, which was by dramatically enforcing the guardrails of democracy. And that, you know, again, I think you have to have a cooperative media to the point that it will at least say, hey, look, the economy's booming, which most Americans don't even know. And as a result, he ended up not pushing as hard as perhaps he now might have wished for voting rights and for the Supreme Court and for the court system. And that simply is going to have to be addressed. It's not going to be addressed before this next election, but this is why this next election is so important.
Heather, you mentioned earlier Project 2025, which is a brainchild of the Heritage Foundation and really a blueprint for essentially a right-wing takeover of the federal government. And if it's enacted, it's extreme and would dismantle much about the way that the government currently operates. Can you describe this just a little bit for people? And I don't know if we have time to talk about whether this effort compares to times in the past when people have tried to put in extreme agendas in the United States.
So let me start there, and then I'm going to say something that's going to surprise you, I think, and then I will talk a little bit about 2025. No, this is the first time we have a major American political party that is actively working to destroy democracy and put in its place a religious government. It's a first. I mean, we're in a lot of firsts, and we should be scared, but it's not over. You know, this election really is out there, and the numbers that are mobilizing to push back against Project 2025 and against the extremists who've taken over certain branches of our government is huge. About Project 2025, though, that I think I'm going to say that might surprise you is that many people are now paying attention to it. And one of the best write-ups that I have seen on Project 2025 is in People magazine. Yeah, I know, which I find fascinating, because as one of the things we're seeing is our legacy media is not rising to this occasion. And other media that many people had either not known was there, like all of us independent people, or I would not have gone to People magazine for one of the best write-ups on 2025. I just wouldn't have. My mistake, because it's fabulous. So I would urge people to look there, but also see that there's a larger grassroots story there. People magazine went where its people are, which are people like you and me, as opposed to, whoever reads the Wall Street Journal. All right. Project 2025 is pretty simple. What it does is exactly what I've been describing. It gets rid of the system that we have. It gets rid of Congress, not literally. It doesn't really discuss what Congress, it doesn't focus on Congress, because what it says is that most important in our society is a very strong executive, a very strong president who cannot be checked by either the Congress or the courts. And of course, the Supreme Court has said that the president can not be prosecuted for crimes he commits in the course of his official duties. That doesn't apply to Biden, by the way. It only applies to Trump. And I could explain why that's the case if you want me to. But so it says that the president is this very strong figure who can't be checked. And then it gets rid of our modern state by taking our civil service, which is about 2 million people. Currently, it is overwhelmingly merit-based. It's people who are good at their jobs, experts, and in doing whatever they are supposed to do for the EPA or for the IRS or for OSHA or for, the Department of Commerce or whatever. And gets rid of them and replaces them with people who are loyal to Donald Trump. So remember, he now has been told by the Supreme Court that somebody like Trump, that he cannot be prosecuted for anything he does. Now he will have loyalists in all those positions to do what he tells them to do. But you could sit there and say, well, that's okay, because we have the courts, right? The courts will stand up for people who are being abused by this newly powerful government. But that's part of Project 2025 too, to take over the Department of Justice and make it responsive to that president, and similarly to the military. Once all those pieces are gathered up by that strong president, it will impose the kind of religious government that we've been talking about. Get rid of abortion rights, get rid of LGBTQ plus protections, stop immigration, and deport 11 to 12 million people who are currently living in the country. Get rid of birthright citizenship. Down, you know all the pieces here. Take anybody who talks about LGBTQ plus or trans issues or anything should be considered somebody who is pushing pornography and be arrested. There go librarians. I mean, it's really quite draconian. So that's the blueprint that they have going forward for 2025.
Thank you. So we're getting close to the end of our time, but we do have some more questions for you. If you have time, we'd like to continue.
I'm fine.
Yeah.
I mean, but nobody should feel that they have to stay.
Right.
It's I don't know what time it is where you are, but yeah, I mean, I love talking about this stuff, so I'm happy to.
Okay. Well, a lot of us are in the same time zone you are. So here's another question for you. We see the Supreme Court isn't a good guardrail. We've just established that. So who will ensure our guardrails, and especially when one of the two parties is going off the rails?
This is why we're here. It's us. We're the guardrails. I mean, this is where I started, is for so long now, and I think in part because of the rise of this idea of the individual fighting back against the empire, and the degree to which that imagery drew from the cowboy imagery in America, that that one cowboy is going to ride in and save everybody. And you've seen that play out since Trump took office. People kept saying, oh, Robert Mueller's going to save us. Merrick Garland's going to save us. The impeachment's going to save us. The Supreme Court's going to save us. But you know what? The media is going to save us. All those guardrails have fallen away. There is one guardrail left, and it's us. The same way it was in the 1850s. It is us. And while that's frightening in a lot of ways, it's incredibly empowering. And one of my favorite stories about heroes is a story that a colleague wrote about not at my university. I'm not sure we've ever actually met, but she's a scholar, wrote a book called Angels of the Underground. And it's about 4 women who ran the underground in the Philippines during World War II. And they were true heroes. And you hear that and you think, oh man, like they must have been really special. They were ordinary people who, one woman was just trying to find her husband. And so she started to learn all the passwords and she started to learn the secret routes. My favorite woman, when the Japanese invaded, they told everybody to come and get registered, and then they would be able to go home. She shows up to get registered with everybody else, and she has a panic attack, and she can't stay because she's having a panic attack. And everyone keeps saying, no, don't go home. Don't go home. Stay here because you just have to be registered. And then you can go home and you can do whatever you need to get over your panic attack. And she says, I can't. She goes home to her apartment. Of course, everybody else gets rounded up and moved off. And there she is alone in her flat because she's had a panic attack. She's alone. So what does she do? She looks out the window and she recognizes after a couple of weeks all the patterns of the Japanese soldiers moving around. And all 4 of them were just ordinary people who got out of bed. They didn't get out of bed and say, I'm going to be a hero. They got out of bed and put one foot in front of the other. And together, they managed to run the resistance in the Philippines during World War II. And that's where we are today. We're all heroes. We're just getting out of bed and doing the next right thing. There is no grand plan where somebody is going to come and swoop in and say, hey, we were kidding. The Supreme Court's not really going to do that. Or the media is suddenly going to say, oh, yeah, we're going to take care of this for you. It's up to us. And for all that's terrifying, oh my God, what an opportunity to be the people who are going to defend democracy the same way that Abraham Lincoln did, the same way that Frederick Douglass did, the same way that Sitting Bull tried to, or Crazy Horse, the same way that Fannie Lou Hamer did, the same way that Thurgood Marshall did. We are the ones who get to carry on that legacy and to stand against those same people who stood with the Confederates and who stood with the neo-Nazis and who are currently standing with the MAGA Republicans. And for all that it's terrifying, by God, I'd rather be on our team than to be on their team. And this is one of the reasons that I show up at places like this, is that most of us will probably never meet in real life, but we're on the same team and we're all just getting out of bed every day, putting one foot in front of the other and trying to do the next right thing. And in the American past, when people have done that, they have recovered democracy. And if we do that, imagine what this world could look like.
And on that note, we want to say thank you so much for giving us such excellent information, but also leaving us with hope and the reality that I love this. I want to make a t-shirt now. We are the guardrails.
Right. Yeah, we'll make
Yes.
it a fundraiser.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
We're so grateful.
So grateful. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Ari, and Betsy. Great program. I think folks would love to have it go on and on and on. I'm going to end my piece of the program, which so many of you participated in the most generous and remarkable way. I said we wanted to raise $100,000. You proved me so wrong. Oh my gosh, proved me so wrong. We've raised $200,000 for our 12 candidates, the state legislators, the federal candidates. It matters so much. It's unfortunate that so much of our politics runs on money. It just does. You know it. We know it. You've stepped up. Can't thank you enough. But it doesn't just run on money. As Heather pointed out so clearly, it runs on us, our sneakers, our phones, showing up, doing the work, a lot of grunt work, a lot of doors, just a lot of heart and soul. Oh, let's not forget those letters, stamps, and envelopes. And that's what we have to do too. I mean, that's why we're here tonight. So I'm going to turn it back to Dory, who's going to tell you more about how to do that.
So, Heather, as you were talking, I was thinking of a song from one of my favorite singers, who is Fred Small. At least I hope this is a Fred Small song, who one of his lyrics is, beware of the heroes, beware of the stars, 'cause the victory is hollow if it ain't really ours. And that reminded me so much of what you were saying. So thank you for that. I was just hanging on your words. Thank you. So as Deborah said, donating money is important, and whether we like it or not, campaigning is expensive, but it also takes you, your time, your energy, your volunteering. And I'm willing to bet that every person on this Zoom has at some point volunteered for something. And A, it felt really good. And B, right now the need is urgent and the rewards will be huge. And C, as any political volunteer can tell you, it's cheaper than therapy. So I'm here to talk about volunteering. If you're already pitching in, thank you. I hope you'll feel great about it. Maybe I'm about to say something that'll inspire you to do more. Either way, thank you. But if you haven't found your spot, you're not alone. So listen up. I'm inviting you to give this a try, and this is a guilt-free couple of minutes. On the screen is SSPA's Silver Spring Progressive Actions calendar for the next week or two. And I'm using this really as an example only. In the chat, we're going to put NOPE's calendar, SSPA's calendar, and a link to the document where you can find calendars and opportunities from all of our co-sponsoring groups. We all have actions that I hope will bring success in November. But I want to talk about this one example because it is emblematic of all of the groups. So this weekend, we are canvassing in Harrisburg for Janelle Stelson. We have raised, as you can see, a ton of money for her, and you can still donate to her. Janelle is running against Scott Perry, who is horrible. He was in on the planning of January 6th, total Trumper, and just bad in general. She is a sensible, likable candidate, middle of the road. She used to be a Republican, but she needs help at the doors introducing herself to people, including responsible Republicans who may be willing to vote for her as a sensible alternative. We're also deep canvassing in Philadelphia. Deep canvassing is a way to have more deeper, obviously, heartfelt conversations with people. In this case, we're having those kinds of conversations with infrequent voters, people who don't think the political system of any party works for them, to help them understand the threat of a Trump presidency, and especially the promise of Dem actions finally coming to fruition. They've not all come to fruition yet. And then to have them remember that and take that recognition and their friends to the ballot box. And then this Sunday, we're having a detox dance party to celebrate the end of the GOP convention, because yes, we need to do stuff with joy. And it's been a long couple of weeks. Next week, we start with the phone bank to Arizona voters to vote by mail. And we have 2 gatherings to do letters for our phone bank. I just want to remind you that, we just raised all that money for Janelle Stelson. We're going to canvass. We just raised a ton of money for state candidates, Kelly Butler and Karen Gresham in Arizona. They're running for the Arizona State House. We're having a phone bank for them for 2 reasons. One is to get people in Arizona to sign up to vote by mail. It's hard to vote in Arizona, especially in the heat. But guess what? The Arizona GOP, who runs the state legislature right now, cut back on voting opportunities, including voting by mail. So we're signing up people to vote by mail and to get these 2 elected because we think we have an opportunity to flip the Arizona State House this year. Let's see. So I don't know if you can see the dollar bills in this little graphic, but they're there. It's a picture of how it takes everything. And I just want to say again that we at SSPA don't have a lock on this. You may gravitate to another group or another area or doing something similar. There's room for all of the groups, all of the people. Volunteering, giving, it all helps. But it doesn't help complaining and hoping. It's not a meme like thoughts and prayers are, but doing is what helps. I'll complain right along with you, believe me, but then I'll do something. And I think you do too. Thanks for listening. Sign up for something. I want to close by inviting Deborah to join me on the screen. It's been a wonderful evening. Huge thanks one more time to the beautiful and persistent Heather Cox Richardson. Thanks to Lisa Adams, who is essential in making this happen. And thanks to Cheryl Silver for making the initial connection. Thanks all of you for coming. Deborah.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you again. Many of you, it's all about showing up. That's really, Dory, you know how many days there are until the election, right? You probably have this front and center. It's just not that many. Make the commitment, just make the commitment to show up for a weekend, show up for a week, 1 day a week, make phone calls every night, make phone calls, write your letters, just show up. Coming to our meetings is fabulous. Heather has certainly inspired us to step up because we are the ones we're waiting for. That classic Barack Obama quote. So let's just get this thing done. I mean, it really, we can do this, and we've shown it tonight. You've reached so far beyond what we expected. So appreciated. Now we just have to keep at it. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, all.